The breaking news out of Washington, D.C. Once again, Jack Smith shows up in the headlines.
Chuck Grassley of the Judiciary Committee had asked the courts about specifically why Judge James Boasberg had made this decision to issue a non-disclosure order on the subpoenas that Jack Smith had issued against sitting members of Congress. You know that there were, I think, was it 9 or more of them that were just in the senator category? Plus you had a member of Congress that was scooped up in it, where they had subpoenaed the phone records around before and after January 6th of these sitting members of Congress. And then they asked the court to issue a non-disclosure order to the phone company saying, you cannot tell your customer, in this case, the sitting member of Congress, that their records have been subpoenaed. Now, Chuck Grassley was asking the courts, what was the decision-making process? Why was this done? And the response, and I think, Jordan, this is once again why these stories are important, especially when it happens to a member of Congress, because it sheds light on how the system is run and happens and can affect even everyday Americans. So what the court's rationale here is, it says, and by the way, we're not going to get into, we don't think it's prudent or within the separation of powers for us to go into the decision-making of a judge. However, we will tell you this, that when these orders are requested by the Department of Justice for a non-disclosure order under 18 U.S.C. 2705B, which would prohibit a service provider from disclosing information about a grand jury subpoena, generally is filed electronically. The DOJ typically requests that such applications and all related filings be docketed under seal, and these requests are normally granted. The district court dockets NDO applications in related court orders using its SC, Stored Communications case type, and the applications orders remain under seal unless and until request for unsealing is made and granted. The applications for NDOs typically do not attach the related subpoena. Rather, they identify the subject accounts only by a signifier, e.g., a phone number. And they go on to say that normally these are boilerplate requests, so it doesn't go into any specifics of why maybe it's important to not let the target of a subpoena know that they're being subpoenaed. And in fact, the judges normally just grant them. So DOJ requests, and they complain about separation of powers here, but yet they're just rubber stamping through the courts these requests. It raises a host of constitutional issues, Jordan, as well as the protection of everyday Americans' information. If judges are just getting the request in boilerplate language, rubber stamping it through, and they would have to know the individual's phone number at a glance, or ask more questions to even know who this order is pertaining to.
What's interesting here is that there are administrative subpoenas that the DOJ can issue on its own. Now, when you look at those, you'd say there's like drug crimes, healthcare fraud, reasons why you'd want, we were talking about before, like, and drugs is on there. First thing we talked about today was, again, not disclosing to a bunch of drug names out. You wouldn't want that public because then they'd know and it would mess up the entire investigation. And I'm wondering if that's how Jack Smith went at this. But his was a criminal investigation. Now, in criminal, those are administrative subpoenas are kind of a part of investigations, but they're not supposed to be like the criminal investigation, which would go through a grand jury subpoena process so the grand jury can subpoena the documents. It would then be issued. That doesn't require a judge approval, but it requires a grand jury to say, yes, let's get these documents. And then there's actual judicial subpoenas. So I'm wondering here is, where did he file this? I'm trying to go through the document. As a criminal investigation, was he doing it under the administrative subpoena ability of the DOJ? But this has been changed. In 2024, this was changed. So this law but he filed these before 2024. So moving forward, after 2024, prosecutors are required to notify the court if they're seeking a gag order against a member of Congress so that judges can take that into consideration. Yep. So that has changed. But he is using the previous gray area to say, well, I don't need to ask questions. And by the way, just to make clear to everybody, they don't have to be a rubber stamp. There's no law that says You can't ask these prosecutors, what am I doing here? I don't have your subpoena. You didn't attach it. You're asking for all these different phone numbers. I don't even know what this is about. And you're not only asking for the phone numbers, information going to Verizon, all these different companies. You're asking me to keep it under seal so that the people whose phone numbers those are never get notified.
And yes, there are times, Jordan, when, yes, the DOJ, if they are pursuing a case against someone, would need to keep that under wraps and not let someone know they're the target of an investigation, where that person's a flight risk, or whether it's because of an impending threat to Americans or to people that could be harmed by that, or whether or not they're afraid of tampering with witnesses or something of that effect, or destroying or obstruction of justice in some sort of way. When you're talking about members of Congress and it being rubber stamped, and also I to some degree, I feel like that should be the exception of issuing these type of non-disclosure, not just the general rule that every judge follows this rubber stamp method. If that is the case, if the Justice Department can effectively ask whatever they want of the courts, at least under a Biden administration, when it's going after conservatives here, then what is the point of the third co-equal branch of government being the judiciary, if they're just effectively a rubber stamp administrative office for the Department of Justice?
Right. This is why we have said that the Department of Justice, like so many government agencies, we talked about the IRS, we took on the IRS, and they've had to change their policies when it comes to their tax exempt division. And we totally, kind of cleared house of that division. And, there haven't been the kind of issues that haven't arisen lately, if you've realized, and one-offs every once in a while, but it's not widespread, and you would know about it widespread now because people are looking for that. Like, hey, if my conservative group got this, did other groups that were like this get this? And you're not hearing about it now. That's because that whole tax-exempt division got new rules. We got the consent decree that said you can't do this, you can't politically target. The information you were seeking was wrong. When you read through this and you start realizing that it's like what we're seeing here is they're playing hot potato. Okay, so first it's Jack Smith. Then you go to Jack Smith and say, Jack Smith was looking for this information. And then you go to the judge and say, hey, judge, why did you just sign off on all this? And then the judge's administrative division, not the judge themselves, but their administrative division writes back and says, well, because the judge doesn't even know what they're asking for. Well, then why does it even go to a judge? Right. I mean, at this point, like you start for gag orders. I mean, so they're just issuing gag orders at random based off numbers. They don't even know if the numbers are real. So think about that. There's no, and now that has been corrected for members of Congress, but we also have to think about, should this be corrected further for Americans as well?